Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with a Coach. Today we have a question from an anonymous viewer who says, "Hey Ramsey, hope you're doing okay over there during the quarantine." Yeah, I am doing okay. Thank you for asking. If you want to know more about that, go check out my recent podcast with my friend Kyle Rozuski. Link in the description below. We talk about that a lot. All about the quarantine, all about the city being shut down, all about everything that has developed and changed in the last couple of weeks since my last video about this whole viral outbreak here in China. Anyway, our anonymous friend goes on to say, "You probably already know about the famous 3.5 hour long Vale Tudo match between Helio Gracie and Santana back in the 50s. Even though he lost the bout, people were wondering afterwards, what was his secret? How could a man in his 40s be able to go nearly 4 hours against a fighter who was much younger than him at the time?" That's making me laugh a little bit because I'm in my 40s. And I spend the bulk of nearly every day training and sparring and handling guys half my age. So that's not strange to me at all, but I'll get into it in a bit. So our anonymous friend goes on to say, "The late Gracie mentioned that part of it had to do with his personal nutrition, otherwise known as the Gracie Diet. You probably already know about it, but this is what he had to say about it. My brother Carlos once told me, 'Helio, this diet is very important to us. We don't want to waste physical energy to digest.' And that's a good point, because some foods take longer to digest than others, and digestion takes about 20% of your body's total energy. Did you know that? So if you have food that slowly digests sitting in your gut, you will have less energy than food that digests more quickly. But I digress. Let's read the rest of this before I accidentally advocate for the Gracie Diet. All right. So we started doing a diet with food that combines, after being ingested, to change their chemical composition. We'll get into that too. And our diet is based on foods that have the same chemical reaction to avoid organic erosion throughout the years." Organic erosion. All right. So he pretty much had this stuff down to a science. I was wondering if you ever did a video about the Gracie Diet or about that match between him and Santana, or if you plan on doing so in the future. Let's talk about that match first, and then the Gracie Diet. So Helio Gracie, he had a student, Valdemar, how do you say that? My Portuguese is terrible. Valdemar Santana. And they had some kind of falling out, and Valdemar started doing Vale Tudo fights against the Gracies and eventually went up against Helio, and I watched this whole thing back in the day. Like 20 years ago, after I saw UFC 1 and UFC 2 and UFC 3 and Royce Gracie doing all that cool jiu-jitsu that nobody had ever seen in cage fights for the first time ever. I wanted to learn everything about the Gracies. I wanted to learn about this crazy jiu-jitsu witchcraft that they were doing. And so I found all of the videos, all of these tapes, that every last one I could find. And that was one of them, that 3-hour match between Santana and Helio Gracie. And looking back in retrospect, it was one of the most boring things you will ever watch. But I watched the whole excruciating 3 hours of Helio Gracie lying on the bottom, on his back, inside control, getting squished. Helio had this kind of famous saying in the jiu-jitsu world that he did not train to win, he trained to not lose. And so in his mind, the fact that he could lie on his back for hours and hours and not get submitted was a victory in and of itself. And I guess that's okay to believe that. Sure, why not? Especially if you are starting out in jiu-jitsu, if you're a new white belt, for example, cherish the small victories. If you're constantly getting squished, but maybe one day you're rolling with your coach, or you're rolling with a black belt or a brown belt or something, and they can't submit you on that particular day. Celebrate that victory. Why not? Give yourself a pat on the back. Hey, I did something good. Now let's do something better tomorrow. Okay? But, man, Helio, that's a slightly different scenario. A man in his 40s. How old was Helio at the time? I think he was like 43, maybe 44. I'm 41 right now. And you may not be aware of this, but the peak levels of human strength are achievable between the ages of 35 and 50. What? But all of the 35 to 50-year-olds I know are sedentary guys who don't work out, and they have beer bellies, and their gut sticks out over their pants, and they get winded going up the stairs. That's impossible. I've never met anyone like that in my social circle among the 12 people that I associate with closely. Do some research on that. Google search engines are a powerful tool, man. Do some research on that. The peak levels of human strength are achievable between the ages of 35 and 50. And human strength, you might be thinking, why don't we see 50-year-old gymnasts in the Olympics? There are a lot more variables in gymnastics than strength. There are a lot more variables in all these other sports where we generally see young people participate in than strength. And also people in their 50s have other stuff to do than commit their entire lives to the Olympics. However, if you look at Greco-Roman wrestling and weightlifting in the Olympics, those are sports where you often see older athletes participate and win. It's not uncommon to see a man in his 30s or 40s in those events in the Olympics. Why is that? Well, I would say it has something to do with the fact that strength plays heavily into the sports of weightlifting and Greco-Roman wrestling. And that is when you start to develop your old man strength. It is a real thing. It's an absolute real thing. So how can a 40-year-old, how can a guy in his 40s handle a guy half his age? If you have been training in martial arts for a meaningful amount of time, and in Helio Gracie's case, his whole life, and you are not a good athlete, and you are not a good martial artist, and you are not able to handle people in a fight at age 40, you have done something wrong. You've fallen off the wagon somewhere along the line. And it's possible that you may not be getting out there and training as much as you think you are, or as efficiently as you think you are. If you have reached this phase in your life, and you're not at that level of fitness and skill. So let's talk about the Gracie Diet. Did the Gracie Diet give Helio Gracie magic powers? No. Is the Gracie Diet bad or good? Well, let's talk about the pros and the cons. What is the Gracie Diet? Basically, they have a list of columns of foods that you should eat, and they have this belief that if you eat certain foods in combination, then it will create some magical chemical properties in the body which will grant you additional health or prowess in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or something like that. And if you look at the foods on that list, for the most part, they are good, healthy, whole foods. Got stuff like lean meats, fish, squid, I think that was one of them, vegetables, fruits, basic stuff like that. There's no garbage on that list. There's no candy, there's no donuts, no crazy unsaturated fats or whatever. So if you ate the Gracie Diet, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. What is a good diet to eat for an athlete? Whole foods. And the Gracie Diet is filled with whole foods. So if you believe in the Gracie Diet, if you're eating it, and if it's working out for you, great, keep doing it. Because it's not a bad diet. It's not. But here is where I take issue, is that their claims are not scientific. They're not scientifically founded. Essentially what it is alchemy. It's, if you take this ingredient and this ingredient, we're like mixing potions in a game of Skyrim or something like that, and then we get +5 jujitsu skill if we drink this magic potion or whatever. That's not how food works. It's just not. Now, you could look at related concepts, like if you eat this food with this particular, what's the word I'm looking for, amino acid, and then this other food with this particular amino acid, for example, a grain and a legume, and you put those two amino acids together, you get a complete protein. Sure, there is a basis in science to support that. But the idea that if you eat oranges after you eat a meal that contains, I don't know, bread or something like that, that it's just going to ruin your day, that's weird, man. That's weird. Yes, oranges are on the do not eat list, on the far right column of the Gracie Diet. I looked that up. Pineapples also. Apparently they had I'm guessing maybe Helio was struggling with, I don't know, acid reflux disease or something like that, and so those acidic fruits didn't agree with him. I don't know. But yeah, eating it's not alchemy, guys. It's not a game of Skyrim, Elder Scrolls, whatever, where you're mixing different ingredients together and you get magic potion results. It doesn't work like that. If you want to know about food science, check out a textbook on food science and nutrition. That is a actual real science. There are food scientists out there. They are perhaps the most underappreciated and some of the most important scientists on planet Earth. You can't live without food. We can live without aerospace. We can live without iPhones. We can live without all of this amazing space-age technology, which science is responsible for bringing us, but we cannot live without food. And so why is it that the food scientists are the unsung, unrecognized heroes of our world? I don't know. Read up on food science and nutrition. I took a college class on the subject, and it blew my mind at how much about food, science, and nutrition I did not know. And how much I got wrong, man. So, is the Gracie Diet good? The foods on that list that are prescribed, great for the most part. Although I think sugar was on there, on the do-eat list. Sugar. Yeah, refined sugar. Kind of weird they have sugar on the list, but not oranges. I don't know. I'm going to take some issue with that. Unless you have a food intolerance for oranges. Another thing that's quite interesting, and very unscientific about that as well, is the concept about how fast some of these foods actually digest. For example, in the list of meats, most of it was fish. Fish, seafood, squid, things like that. And a lot of people tend to think, oh, fish is a light meal. It's not like red meat that's heavy. Because red meat has this, it's got this stigma of being a very heavy meal, and it is. It's not an unfounded one. It takes about 72 hours, about 3 days, on average, to digest red meat completely. To get to the point where you put it in your mouth, to the point where your body has assimilated the proteins in that meat, and then you pooped it out. About 3 days, 72 hours. And if you take a lighter meal, like, say, chicken, depending on your gut health, that could be digested within a day, or even less. So 3 times faster digestion means that you will be spending less energy to digest that food. So generally speaking, if you're going to eat red meat, I would recommend eat that on your rest day or whatever, because then you will have more energy and eat more quickly digestible meals. So the concept behind the Gracie Diet is a good one in that sense, that we should eat foods that are more easily digestible when we are training. Sure, I get that. But let's go back to fish. Their main recommended meat, fish. How long does fish take to digest? The exact same amount of time as red meat, which is not on their list. 72 hours or 3 days to digest, to metabolize, and to assimilate the proteins in fish, and then poop it out through your system. It's exactly the same. So this idea that fish is this light meal and red meat is not scientifically founded. It's based on how people feel about eating fish, because fish generally has lighter colored meat. Yeah, people are being racist about their food. This one's dark, that one's light, so the light one's good and the dark one's bad. Ever heard that before? That's called racism when we apply it to humans. But when we apply it to the colors of meat, somehow people call it science when it is not. And they used to call racism science. Did you know that? Scientific racism? Man, that was a whole different era in human history. They actually gave some of those guys honorary doctorate's degrees to some of America's greatest universities. Here's an award for your not casual racism, for your major racism, for advocating that as science. So it might be a little thing to say, well, you know, the Gracie Diet isn't doing anybody any harm. It's not like real. Sorry if I'm saying if it's sounding like I'm saying the Gracie Diet is Hitler. No, it's not at all. But when we accept things that are not science as science, and what is science? It is proven knowledge. It is empirically provable, repeatable knowledge. When we pass off something that is not science as science, we open ourselves up to all manner of nonsense. And when we accept nonsense into our lives as food, if you will, food for your body and food for thought, where does it stop? Take that as you will. Again, study up on food science and nutrition. It is fascinating stuff. It's not just important, it's fascinating. A lot of scientific pursuits, frankly, are boring and incomprehensible to the average person, but food science, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand it. So read up on it. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.